I felt it was my fault.
Time has barely healed this mother's pain of guilt. She was the first victim of one of the country's most prolific serial rapists, the black cab driver John Worbys. The rape took place 11 years ago in 2003. She'd been out partying one night and remembers heading home in a trusted black cab.
He pulled over and I remember him getting in the back of the cab with me, and as he got in the back he put his arm round me, and I don't know if he offered me a cigarette, but for some reason I made the comment of saying, "Oh, you're nice." The next memory I have is waking up in hospital, extremely disorientated, upset. As soon as I got out of bed I was all dizzy. I knew I'd been drugged straight away.
She went to police, but they didn't believe her. Her memory was wiped, and Worbys was careful to cover his tracks, but the investigation was deeply flawed.
I had a call from the investigating officer to tell me that they were closing the file, they were closing the case. And I said, you can't do this. He's going to do it again. I know he's going to do it again. You've made it too easy for him to walk away. He will reoffend, and I know he will.
What was the response?
A black cab driver wouldn't do that because he'd be risking his livelihood.
5 years later, Worbys was caught, but by then another 104 women had fallen victim to his modus operandi. The black cab, charm, and then drinks spiked with date rape drugs. The mother's case was reopened.
That's where the guilt started to set in, because I was thinking, if they'd have listened to me, all these women, and it really hit home the day I had to do the ID parade, when I walked into a room and there must have been at least 20 to 30 other women waiting to do the ID parade, and they're all chatting amongst themselves, and I just sat in the corner thinking, you're all here because of me. You're here because I wasn't believable. If I was believable, you all would be getting on with your lives as you should be. You wouldn't be sitting here having to identify the guy that's raped you. You're all here because of me.
That nightmare may be coming to an end. She and another of Worbys' victims are awaiting a High Court judgment. Bringing the case, telling her story in front of a judge, has been therapeutic. But this is not about revenge. It's about the unseen impact of appalling police failures.
I felt nobody believed me. And then I started to think, I've made it up. It didn't happen. And then I started having suicidal thoughts, and then thinking, I can't because of my son, and I'm a mum and I've got to be here for him, but I was falling apart. And I remember one time my little boy wasn't very old, he was a toddler at the time, and I was dancing around, I was so low and I wouldn't cry in front of him. And I wanted to cry, so we put the music on and we were dancing, and I kept thinking, if I'm not here tomorrow, he's going to remember Mum was fun. And this wasn't about the rape. The rape I can't remember. I really can't remember that. It was the police made me feel that I'd made it all up. And I hadn't made it up.
The central theme of her case is that the Metropolitan Police is guilty of fundamental breaches of her human rights. Why? Because carefully crafted guidelines for investigators in this very sensitive area of crime were neither taught nor followed. It left this victim with having to put her life back together.
Had they done their job properly, then there wouldn't have been all these victims. And nobody's really held their hands up and said, we've made mistakes, we're going to change things, really. Because that's the whole point of us going to court, because they won't accept they've done anything wrong. And I need them to accept what they've done is really wrong, and they need to learn. They need to start realising you don't treat people like this.
The process has taken many years. for this woman to rid the feeling that her failure to convince police makes her in some way responsible for what followed. An independent inquiry was very critical of officers involved in that investigation. But that's not enough. She wants an admission, evidence that a culture of disbelief has changed. This case may well go some way towards achieving that. Does this court case mean closure for you?
Yes, it will do, because the police have got to finally admit that they have made mistakes and they need to learn by them. Because they had that information 10 years ago, more than 10 years ago, and they could have acted on it. They should have acted on it.
Ultimately, this isn't just about her case. It's about repeated failures over 5 years across a city as a whole, as more victims came forward, but little was done. The fact that in the end Worbys was caught may not excuse police from its ever-present obligations.